Check my speakers. Okay, cool bananas. We are on form, we are live, and welcome to the party. Okay, so we're going to start with sharing the screen, and away we go. Wait, that's not working. Slideshow from the beginning. I'm figuring it out. Okay, so welcome to the party. We are continuing how we began last year, well, with more formal classes with slides and that sort of stuff. I took a hiatus from that just to get back into some more general talking about conservation regarding the big five, and we did 3 of the big 5. I covered cats in the 1 episode, and we're not doing rhinos because rhinos will be done to death. We might visit at some point in the future. But we are doing Euarchontoglires, which are the rodents and their relatives, including primates, which means us. And we will be doing that in the future over the next couple of weeks, couple of months. There's a lot to talk about rodents and their relatives. So you guys can interject anytime you want. And if you've got questions, by all means, please ask. Okay, so to recap, I'm sure you guys have all heard about the Permian extinction, the Trias extinction, and the Cretaceous extinction. But and you've heard of Pangaea, Laurasia, and Gondwanaland. Now, we've talked about Afrotherians. Afrotherians are elephants and their relatives, which include dugongs, dussies, and whatnot. Now, Laurasia, we've covered in quite in depth with the bigger animals. Now, Laurasia was broken up into 2 groups of animals, the Laurasiatherians, which pretty much think of a big animal and they're one of them, except for the Afrotherians, including elephants. But everything from giraffes through to deer, to antelope, to camels, and all those guys are part of the Laurasiatherians. And in what was ancestral Europe and Asia, the rodents and their ancestors evolved. And we're going to be discussing that over the next few weeks. So the first known rodent that we have ever heard of or have any fossil evidence of was Juramia sinensis, which occurred 160 million years ago. Now that was 100 million years or 95 million years before the dinosaurs went extinct. So mammals have lived alongside reptiles and dinosaurs for an inordinate amount of time, far longer than people realize. People tend to think of the age of dinosaurs as being exclusively dinosaurs. Rodents and rodent-like creatures were running all over the show. And if you remember back to early last year, we talked about that. I don't know if you guys were here for that, but this would have been what the world was looking like. You would have had rodents, you would have had rodent-like mammals, you would have had a lot of reptilian, pseudo-mammalian form reptiles running around. You would have had a lot of the classical dinosaurs. And that was the age of dinosaurs, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. And rodents and small mammals kind of get left behind in that wake and get ignored, but they were an integral part of that ecology. They were a food source for numerous small predators, and they weren't very large in size, but there was a large biodiversity of them, and they covered all the gaps that birds and other dinosaurs didn't cover. So let's do a recap for where we were. So last time we covered the orders of the Laurasiatherians and the Afrotherians. I'm using a lot of scientific words here. You don't have to remember all the words, as I've told people before, but just get the concepts. Okay, so Laurasiatherians include the following. That's weird. Why is it doing? The Artiodactyla, which is cloven hoof and ungulates, so anything with 2 toes or 4 toes. The Perissodactylans, which are odd-toed ungulates, like your horses and rhinos and tapirs. Carnivores, which is pretty much all the classic carnivores you can think of, everything from wolves to seals, to cats, to mongooses, all those guys. Chiroptera, which are the bats, and of course the insectivores, which we're not going to be covering. We covered them last time. Now, as you can see, the Laurasiatherians include cloven hoof animals, these odd-toed ungulates, the carnivores, and the chiropterans, amongst others. Afrotherians evolved exclusively on the continent of Africa before Africa got attached to mainland Europe and Asia. And they include the following: the dugongs and manatees, the elephants, the hyraxes, aka the dussies, and the Afroinsectivora, which include elephant shrews, golden moles, and tenrecs. And now these guys have this amazing convergent evolution with true shrews, true moles, and true hedgehogs, and they look identical to all three of those guys, but they are, again, completely unrelated. So the same ecological vacuums provide opportunities for similar organisms to evolve. So tenrecs, remember, which we discussed last year, look identical to hedgehogs and behave exactly the same. Golden moles behave the same as normal moles, and elephant shrews behave the same as shrews, but they're completely unrelated. And the aardvarks, which is just weird. Tubular dentata, because they have these tubular type teeth, which are made out of a ceramic type substance rather than classic enamel. There's sirens, proboscideans, hyraxes, and afroinsectivorans. And of course, they're tubular dentatans. There's only one species of these guys, though. So today we're doing Euarchontoglires. I finally got my tongue around the word. It is a tongue twister note. They're also known as the Supraprimates, which is a pretty cool word to define rodents and their relatives. So these guys include classic rodents, lagomorphs, so rabbits, hares, and pikas, your treeshrews, which you guys have probably not heard of before, but we're doing those tonight. These guys, colagos or flying lemurs, which I'm sure you've never heard of before, they're critically endangered, and classical primates. So we've talked about mammals have evolved all over the planet, and we've covered a few different areas. Talked in the Xenothera, which are from South America, Afrotherians, which have come from Africa, the monotremes, which are egg-laying mammals, which are spiny anteaters and platypuses, marsupials, which have those pouches, coming almost exclusively from Australia and the Americas, although they did evolve in the Americas, and the Loriotherians and Euarchontoglires, which occur in the Northern Hemisphere and have gradually over the last 100 million years kind of filtered out all over the show. Now, dinosaurs and their relatives dominated the planet for pretty much 120 million years. Bear in mind, since the dinosaurs got extinct, there's only been 65 million years. So they had a really good innings. They were not a failure. They were far more of a success stories than we were. We've only been around, modern humans, for about 200,000 years, and our current trajectory, we're on our way out. We look like we're succeeding, but we are wiping out our environment, and we probably won't last more than another 8 or 10,000 years at a push. So dinosaurs had a really good innings, and mammals survived dinosaurs by being really small and being very insignificant and inconspicuous, and they just stuck to the background. They were nocturnal, they were burrowers, they lived in trees, they just stayed out of the way, and that's how mammals survived. Once dinosaurs went extinct over 65 million years ago, suddenly this big ecological vacuum occurred, and mammals managed to evolve into the variety of shapes that we have them today. Everything from elephants to whales through to rhinos, giraffes, and all those guys. They were given this massive ecological vacuum because the dinosaurs suddenly went extinct 65 million years ago, which was due to the meteorite hitting Earth 65 million years ago at Chicxulub in South America. Now, we can actually track how rodents and other animals are related and how animals would think by looking at the cranial structure left behind in the fossil record. So we can actually work out how animals are related and how they possibly would have thought looking at the cavities left behind in their brains. So we can also see how animals are related to each other, and we can work at where in history, based on the fossil records, they would have been related to other animals. Likewise, we can also track the the DNA records looking at the molecular clocks, which I've shown way back again. We might do a recap of it. And they can compare the molecular clocks with the fossil records, and 9 times out of 10, they line up perfectly and they agree with each other. So we can say that the molecular clocks, the DNA clocks are showing the mutation of animals at this rate, and the fossils are showing the animals the mutation at this rate, and they line up perfectly and they agree with each other. So we can start to work out the size of animals, the brains of animals, how they thought, what they were thinking, how they behaved, looking at just the cavities left behind in their brains. And likewise, with their DNA, we can also see what genes are prevalent in their behavior and what kinds of behavior will be more prevalent in their DNA. So you can see genes for aggression, genes for subservience, genes for this and genes for that. And again, if they line up with the fossils, you can start connecting the dots and you can start to work out history. And we are working off less than 1% of potential organisms that ever existed. Less than 1% of all animals that ever existed have fossils. Most of them are big, and most of the ones that we do find are found predominantly from desert areas, swamp areas, or marine environments. So the ones that we find that are not from those environments are extremely rare, and the ones that we do find tend to be really large. So our fossil records are very, very, very piecemeal, and that makes finding out about the past extremely challenging. Doesn't stop us though. We can still find out a hell of a lot, even with the tiny bit of evidence that we have, and able to work out things based on the clues. And then every year we make new discoveries. Part of the joys of new technology gives us ways to x-ray the ground and to study fossils and DNA and map all the various aspects of animals' history in ways that we never thought we could do even 50, 20, 15 years ago. And science is an amazing thing, and we are discovering new things every day. So there may be things that I'll talk about now that have been contradicted since last year, and that's part of the joy of science, is that we discover new things. And we've proven wrong, and that's okay. Rather than be right and have to upgrade your information than double down, insist that you're right, and never change anything that you know. If in the past we thought 2 + 2 = 5, we wouldn't say, well, I don't care if it's been proven wrong, I'm going to double down on it. We say, okay, scrap that, moving on, 2 + 2 = 4. And that's how it works with fossils. We might find information that we thought for years was correct. All of a sudden, it's wrong, and we correct it. And everyone says, well, how can you trust anything? I said, well, how can you trust anything? We do the best that we can with the information that we have, and every year it's more and more and more precise. So again, showing these sorts of fossils, we could actually do x-rays of the cavities of the skulls of rodents and other animals, work out the brain sizes and where the certain aspects of their brains were. And based on that, we can kind of interpret, much like with anybody, with any organism, the sorts of behavior these animals would have had. So we can interpret the types of environments and the ecological roles of organisms from 120 million years ago, just based on the cavities left behind in their brains or in their skulls. Now, I've mentioned before that, and we will get to it in about 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks from now, that rodents and primates are related. Now, this is the very first primate that was connected to a rodent, Plesiadapis, which was around 58 million years ago, only 7 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct. And he is the last known ancestor that links both rodents and primates together. We're not going to be covering much about him today, but he is an ancestor of both rodents and primates. And this is what a skeleton would have looked like. We found actually surprising amounts of skeletons left behind these guys. They weren't very big, about the size of a small bush baby, medium-sized bush baby, but fair number of fossils have been found. And for the most part, they're fairly intact. So it gives us a pretty good understanding of their behavior, the ecological roles, how they would have climbed trees based on their biomechanical formations and that sort of stuff. So let's get on to Euarchontoglires. Move that up over there. Say hello to that little rodent. Okay, so Euarchontoglires shares a lot of the similar aspects. They all have ancestral DNA dating back 80 to 90 million years. They're all connected at that point. We know that the first rodents came around 160 million years ago, but we know that all our members, including us, have a linkage dating back to 80 and 90 million years ago. From rabbits to colobos, to treeshrews, to primates, to rodents, we're all linked at about 80 to 90 million years ago to various extents. We all have a vermiform appendix, which is the common household appendix that we all know and love. We've all had appendicitis and had removed and yada, yada, yada. But all Euarchontoglires have these. Be it a rodent, be it a rabbit, be it a human being, we all have that standard appendix that other animals do not have. We have very similar locomotive models. So our bones move in the same way. You might look at yourself and say, how the hell do I relate to a rat? But we do. If you look at the basal movements, they are very similar at a core level. We have far more in similarity with a rodent's locomotion than we would say with a cat. We have plantigrade foot structure, that hand that we know and love, and on your feet as well, which I've discussed before. And we have frontal gripping limbs, which is something that almost all Euarchontoglires have in common, with the exception of rabbits and hares and picos. We'll get onto them in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Lagomorphs are rabbits and their relatives. So rodents are extremely successful in terms of their presence on the planet. They've dominated pretty much every corner of the planet, with the exception of humans. Humans, you could argue, are the most successful organisms on the planet because we exist everywhere. There's not a single place on Earth that humans have not colonized. So you could argue that we're the most successful animal on the planet. But barring humans, rodents are the most successful. They're everywhere. They've been found in every corner of the Earth, even in places that birds don't even exist. And there are over 2,500 species known of rodents. That is incredible. Birds, there's about 10,000, but this is one particular group of mammals, 2,500. So they're one of the most diverse groups of animals on the planet. And there's only a few places in the world where they don't naturally occur. They've been introduced, but they don't naturally occur there. So that's Iceland, Greenland, New Zealand, various islands in the Pacific and Indian Ocean, and Antarctica. Now, they've been introduced to some places, but that doesn't mean they naturally occur there. They haven't got there on their own accord. So the rats in Iceland have been introduced by humans, likewise Greenland, likewise New Zealand, and likewise Antarctica. And if you read about the studies in Marian Islands with rodents eating the birds, those rodents were introduced by people on ships. Okay, so like as I said to you earlier, that rodents and rodent-like creatures were all over the planet 160 million years ago. Now, this little guy was called Rugosodon. Now, he also occurred 160 million years ago. He was in no way a rodent. He looked very similar to a rodent. I'm just trying to move this camera to see if you guys, there we go, move that out of the way. Now, Rugosodon also occurred around 160 million years ago. He was not a rodent, but they looked very similar to rodents. And that's, again, one of those things I refer to as convergent evolution. It's an optimal design for its environment. It kicks ass in its ecological conditions. And no matter what, organisms will tend to evolve towards that point because it's optimal for that environment. Everything else gets kind of weeded out. So you had countless organisms having rodent-like appearances. And we still have this today. So this is what Rugosodon would have looked like 160 million years ago. Not a rodent. Looks like a rodent, though. So one of the earliest rodents, true rodents as we know them today, was Macilamilis, which occurs 38 million years ago. You can still see the fossilized actual flesh in his fossil over there. It's pretty, it's perfect. It's an amazing fossil that we found. But we've also found other types of rodents or rodent-like creatures that occur today, indicating how successful this design is. The marsupial mouse, which is not a mouse, it's a marsupial, so it's related to a kangaroo and a koala. We also have the short-tailed pygmy opossums from South America. Again, most people would have a hard time telling this is a marsupial, but from South America. We have the common shrews, which are insectivorants from Europe, not rodents. We also have racy elephant shrews, or elephant shrews from Africa, which are cousins of elephants and tenrecs and dugongs and manatees, in no way related to a rodent. And yeah, so being small and fluffy with big ears and big eyes is a pretty good structure when you're trying to survive in the wild against numerous predators. It gives you an edge. You can burrow, you can climb to trees, you can manipulate your environment, you can get around, and it gives you an edge. And also because you're smaller, you breed fast, and sometimes quantity is a type of quality in itself, to quote Napoleon. So today we're not going to be talking about rodents. We're going to be talking about a cousin of rodents, Scandentia. And these are the tree shrews, not true shrews. Shrews are totally different. These are just called tree shrews. Incidentally, they happen to be called that name. So they're native to Southeast Asia, and we're covering this evening. We're also talking about the glires, which literally means dormouse in Latin. And they include the lagomorphs, the rodents, and the pikas. I'm sure you've heard of pikas. If you haven't, we'll be talking about them. They're super cute. And the primotomorpha, which are primates, which include primates and flying lemurs. Flying lemurs, yes, they exist, and they're real, and they're pretty badass. So let's talk about Scandentia, the tree shrews. Now, tree shrews, are not true shrews. They are not related in any way to shrews. They're not even related to elephant shrews. They are cousins of rodents. And most species are omnivorous, and they don't all live in trees. They actually, some of them live in, are quite terrestrial. And the big challenge with these guys is that we've had to do most of our studies of molecular evidence, of DNA, rather than fossils, because they tend to be forest dwelling. And if you listen to any of my other classes, or you've read any of my lecture, my posts online, forest dwelling species do not fossilize well, because there's a lot of biological overturn. The fossils, they're in a very humic environment. Decay happens very quickly and things don't get preserved. So you almost never find fossils from forest dwelling environments. Almost all fossils come from marine or swamp-like conditions or desert-like conditions. Almost never, unless it's incredibly specific, where you find fossils from a forest-like environment. So we don't have many fossils for these guys. That being said, some do pop up every now and again. And until recently, because of the molecular evidence, and our DNA studies have not been very conclusive until fairly recently, we used to lump them in with true shrews. Then we realized they're in no way related to true shrews. They have absolutely no genetic relationship whatsoever. They're actually more related to rats, even though they behave like shrews and they climb trees. So tree shrews actually have the highest brain to body mass ratio of any mammal, including humans. We have an incredibly large brain to body mass ratio, but tree shrews have a lot more. It doesn't mean they're particularly intelligent. They're actually pretty dumb, in my opinion. But just incidentally, they tend to have quite high cognitive abilities and they have very large brains. But for any animal under a kilogram, this is quite common. So you'll find that animals under a kilogram tend to have large body to brain ratios anyway. But tree shrews have the largest of all mammals, and then by default, all land-based mammals. I mean, all land-based vertebrates. So the molecular evidence for these guys suggests that they've been around for about 60 million years. And remember, I've talked about molecular clocks, so they can actually date back how far the mutations range. And they show that these guys are separated from other organisms around 60 million years ago, give or take a few million. And molecular clocks are never 100% accurate, but they give us a ballpark figure within a few million years of variation. So you're going to deal with 55 million to 60 million years, give or take 5 million. But you're not going to have a discrepancy of 10 million to 60 million. You might have 5 million years discrepancy. And we can recap with the molecular clocks again. Otherwise, you can watch earlier episodes and you can just catch up on that there. And what's really interesting about these guys is they have an extremely high threshold pain response to capsicum and spicy food. So they can just eat chilies like it's candy. They feel nothing. They just eat, and they're completely comfortable. They can take a whole pepper dew or a whole habanero or one of those ghost peppers and just chow it like it's an apple, and they feel nothing. And that's really interesting because we're going to get to that point later. Now, Scandentia, which are the tree shrews, dominate an area around here. Southeast Asia, you'll see this little line, which we're going to come to later. And it's called the Huxley-Wallace line. And there's three particular genuses that we're going to talk about over here: the Anathar, the Dendrogale and the Tupia, and the Urogale. And again, don't worry with the scientific names. They're just helpful if you want to know them. Scadentia, which are the tree shrews. And there's 29 species in 2 families. 19 species belong to one family, and only 1 species belongs to the other family. Now, the Tupiidae, which literally means an Indonesian squirrel, they're not squirrels, but they happen to look like squirrels. And these include 19 different species. I'm not covering them all tonight, but you can get an identity of the 3 different species. I'm just going to move this over there so you don't see it anymore. So you get the Madras tree shrew, the northern smooth-tailed shrew, and the Palawanan tree shrew. Over here. Now, likewise, you get the pen-tailed tree shrew, which has got this weird feather-like little tail over here. Now, these guys are really weird. They're tiny. They're only about that size over there. They literally fit in the palm of your hand. He's got this weird little feather tail, and no one really knows what it's for. It just kind of exists, maybe about purposes of genetic drift. And they consume extremely high amounts of fermented fruit from birch and palms on a daily basis. I mean, incredible amounts. Now, if you want to think about it, it accounts to the equivalent of drinking 10 to 12 glasses of wine on a daily basis. And these guys have absolutely no effect from it. So they are consuming extremely high amounts of alcohol on a daily basis as part of their regular diet. And they just don't seem to mind it. It's just what they get by in life. And it seems to be a bit like, my spirit animal. They're consuming an inordinate amount of alcohol on a daily basis. Now, you might ask, well, how did spicy foods, we mentioned tree shrews, and how do they relate to spicy foods? And we've actually done some studies, and we've discovered why they actually respond to spicy foods and why they don't actually feel the heat, or also why they don't respond to spicy foods. And peppers and chilies belong to a genus called capsicum of the deadly nightshade family. And this is the same family as tomatoes and potatoes. And all members of this family produce a compound called capsaicin, which has got a big fancy scientific name. You can read it there, and to varying amounts. Some of them are more spicy, some of them are less spicy. And mammals produce a DNA called TRPV1, which is transient receptor potential cation channel subfamily 5 member 1, which is very fancy. And this particular protein in our DNA causes us to feel heat and discomfort when we expose capsicum to our mucous membranes, which is what we love when we feel the heat. So we get a runny nose and we feel that burn at the back of our throat, and it burns on the way out as well. And obviously we know all about that. Now, treeshrews have a mutated TRPV1 gene, which means they cannot feel the heat of capsicum. They can eat it quite happily. We don't have a mutated one, which is why we feel the heat. So for some reason, we like to eat it. Now, the reason why we feel it on the way in and on the way out, this is a bit of a deviation, is because we are deuterostromes. And deuterostromes are basically a walking asshole, for want of another word. Now, protostromes only have one body part, one entrance and one exit. It's the same place. Deuterostromes have one exit and one anus. I mean, one entrance and one anus. Initially, it was one component. So all the cells that you have, the pain receptors and the taste receptors that you have in your mouth are the same as in your anus, which is kind of gross, which is the reason why you feel heat when you actually eat spicy foods, because the same mucus receptors in your mouth are also in your bum. So what does it mean for us? It doesn't mean much. It's all organisms. Pretty much everything on Earth that walks on land is a deuterostrome. I've got a question. Lovely, thank you, Frank. Yeah. Anyway, we're deuterostromes, and it doesn't mean much beyond the fact that our mouth and anus contain the same mucus gland receptors, which is why they both respond to heat of capsicum fruits. Okay. And black and white peppers also produce heat, but they produce it through a compound called piperine, not capsicum. And that's, again, a whole chemical equation. And it doesn't interact with these TRPV1 genes in the same way. And it doesn't burn nearly as intensely. So we don't have the same heat coming in and coming out. It works completely differently, which is why peppers don't burn and why wasabi doesn't burn the same way peppers do, with chili peppers. And there's a bit of a joke there. So humans are deuterostromes, which means that when they're in the womb, the anus forms before any other opening, which basically means at one point you're nothing but an asshole. That. Okay, so coming on to that, I'm sure you guys saw earlier there was a separation which is called the Wallace line. Now, the Wallace-Huxley line is a separation between Asian animals and Australasian animals, and these animals don't seem to separate. And what we have over here, the gray areas of there, where the land masses used to occur before global rises in water during the ice ages, and so you have these large bodies of land that allowed for the movement of animals, but you still had a body of water between Australasia and mainland Asia, which is why you had two different bodies of organisms forming along the Wallace-Huxley line. And they weren't able to cross over. So you'll find Asian animals occurring up to here and Australasian animals occurring up to here. And they don't really seem to do much crossover. There's a bit of blending here and there, but for the most part, the two lines are separated. Now, the Wallace-Huxley line is defined into one of the biographical regions. So we have the Indo-Malaysian region over here. We have the Afrotropical region, the Neotropical, the Neo-Arctic region, the Paleoarctic, and the Australasian. And these are regions that link to both animals and flora. So both groups of organisms tend to adhere to both these lines, and they've evolved to very similar conditions. Now, the last thing we're talking about this evening is the evolution of hands, which this little guy over here, this little tree shrew, has got. Now, hands are incredibly important structures, and they are essential. They have evolved through plantigate foot structures. And all arboreal rodents, their relatives, and similar appearing species have hands that allow them to grip and climb. And the evolution of hands allows rodents and relatives to manipulate food sources and allow for the evolution of primates much later. This little cute pair of hands belongs to a rat, very cute. Likewise, we've seen hands evolving in sloths, which are related to armadillos. We've seen them in koala bears. Again, really weird hands, but hands nonetheless. We've got another question. I don't know why. Okay, I'm not sure why, Boris. I'll upload the video on YouTube and you can catch everything there. Okay, again, with pangolins, and with sugar gliders, which are marsupials from South America. So hands have evolved numerous times independently. And one of the other organisms that evolved hands was monkey dactyl, which was an organism which occurred 160 million years ago. It was a cousin of a pterodactyl, a pterosaur, and had opposable thumbs, which they reckon would have allowed it to climb trees. which is pretty cool. And I wrote a little blog on my Facebook about monkey dactyl and its importance in terms of evolution. And you guys can have a read about that later if you want. Just go and log into my Facebook and browse back a few pages. Now, monkey dactyl's opposable thumbs are listed over here. Pretty interesting facts. Now, capsicum is actually an American fruit from South and Central America. They have, of course, they're synonymous with Indian foods, but they were imported into the Indias. They're not native to the Indias. They come from South America. So capsicum was imported from South America into the Indias and into Asia by the Portuguese around 500 years ago. So Indian food being spicy is not an Indian invention. That's very much a remnant of colonialism. So you can thank colonialism for spicy curries if you want to. And the Portuguese mapped the world over 500 years ago and went from South America, North America, from Asia to Africa and all over the show, and they had their trade routes all over the place. Now, the world produces roughly around 34 million tons of chilies annually. China accounts for half of this, India a third. Chili's heat is measured in Scoville units, SHU. The Carolina Reaper is the hottest Scoville unit in the world, 2.2 million Scoville units. Bell peppers, which we like to put in our cooking, which just taste nice, are 0. They don't have any heat. They're pretty chill. So there's a really big scale. The Carolina Reaper will destroy you. And currently there's over 4,000 varieties of chilies throughout the world and over five different species. So you've got 4,000 different varieties divided amongst 5 different species. So there's an inordinate number of varieties out there and all different types of heat. Anyway, guys, so that was a short little speak tonight about rodents. We've only got 1 minute remaining for some reason. I had to cut it a bit short. We've only given 30 minutes on Zoom right now, but that's life. I hope you enjoyed the chat. I will be uploading it to YouTube. If you can't see anything, hope you learned something. If you have any questions about the treeshrews, feel free to ask me. Yeah, and I'll see you next week for a far more comprehensive introduction into the beginning of true rodents, the hysteromorphs and the skeuomorphs. I hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Auf Wiedersehen. Adios. Good night. Yeah, and if you have any questions, message me on YouTube or WhatsApp. Sorry, on Facebook as well. Ciao.